Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk. We want to welcome you to our debrief of the 88th legislative session. Joining me today will be Mandy Kimball. Mandy is our Vice President and Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at Children at Risk. Mandy, are you around? There you are. Look at you.
Good morning.
So Mandy, well, how would you characterize, and these are our opening remarks, so we can be super informal. How would you characterize this legislative session? Because I'm going to feel free to characterize it. But I want to hear from you first.
I don't know. So I would characterize it as people tried really hard. Texas and our children, our families need a lot of support. If we want to have a successful community, if we want our kids to be academically successful, if we want a strong workforce, the Texas legislature needs to prioritize children and working families. And I think that there were some wins, and we're going to celebrate them today. But today we're also going to be focusing on those missed opportunities and how, as we, as a community, as advocates, as nonprofits, as the business community, the philanthropic community, come together to advocate to make sure that children's needs are met. And so I just want to say, Bob, I'm super excited about the lineup today. We have some fantastic speakers, great partners, people, ladies and gentlemen who were there day in and day out, advocating for our kids to have a real holistic approach.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful, right, that there's so many people around the state, and maybe not enough, but a lot of people around the state that descend upon Austin and really focus on how do we make sure that our future is bright in Texas? How do we make sure that our state legislators understand the reality of what's going on with children and families? When we look at the close to 8 million children that we have in our state, and 1 in 10 children born in America is born in the state of Texas, we're a very young state, a lot of kids. And what we find is that probably we're not paying enough attention to our kids because they really represent the future of our state, the future of our country. And we all come together, we look for the best out of our state legislators, but I think every session we end thinking there was so much more potential. And I think about the $33 billion in surplus that we had at the state. And you and I talked about this, Mandy. We were very excited about the possibility of this money being used in early education and K through 12 education as all the things that were needed sort of to bounce back from the pandemic. Mental health after Uvalde, we felt like we could use a lot more in the area of mental health. And yet we sort of lost that opportunity. And what we got in return was little bits of money sort of in property tax relief that if you're renting, you're never going to really see. And if you own, the amount is so small to not really have a huge significant impact on your family budget. And so the opportunity for us to have spent some of this money to really look at our future and to look at children and families, I think was a big missed opportunity. Mandy, we often we grade schools all across the state. We love to give grades. And in an era of grade inflation, I would give our state legislature a D- because they really failed our children, right? I think when we look at it, we saw some little victories. We saw some victories maybe that we didn't expect. But I think overall, I'm feeling a little bit, and we're going to be very optimistic, I know today, but I'm feeling a little bit like lost opportunity, right, for some of our success. But speaking of success, Mandy, is there a one success that you would think that you put above the rest when you look at our legislative session?
Yeah, and I would agree that there were some lost opportunities. I would like to thank the legislators who did fight. And I think we saw on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans really trying to move the needle forward. But as a body, we wish that they could have worked better together to make that happen. One of the things I'm really excited about, and you will hear from Kim Cochran in a bit, is a piece of legislation that was passed that will now allow a child care property tax exemption to be on the November ballot. And so this is a first. For the first time, Texans will have an opportunity to vote on childcare in November. And so we do want more, and Kim's going to talk about those missed opportunities, but it is a step in the right direction. And hopefully we can raise the awareness of the importance of access to quality, affordable childcare for working families.
Two things I want to mention that I thought were downright mean on the part of our state legislature. One was continuing to bring up our kids that are struggling with gender identity issues and the pediatricians that very privately support these kids, but putting them on the spot and sort of being mean around this issue when it's kids that are just struggling to be happy. And I think the other issue is, immigration. We continue to villainize immigrants and immigration, and a third of all the children in our state are either immigrants themselves or children of immigrants. And we need to stop sort of putting this this hood over our immigrant kids and castigating them when indeed they are part of our future, indeed a big part of our future. And so those are things that I think we should mention. But I think, as always, we go forward optimistically and we say, how do we make sure that every single legislator understands the importance of children and families and how they're so tied together with economic development and our future. And we know that there's a lot to be done. And we hope that this becomes sort of a launching pad for a whole nother year or so of planning before the next legislative session, Mandy.
That's great. That's right. Well, and next legislative session, I think that will be in the near future, right? For special sessions. And so look forward to working with everyone to ensure that those priorities get across the finish line if the opportunity presents itself.
Mandy, I do want to thank you and all the people that have worked with you, with Children at Risk, with the Texas Family Leadership Council, and with so many other groups across the state that go into Austin and really work hard at making sure that legislators understand the need to prioritize our children. So thank you very much for the work that you've done in Austin. And I do want to mention Mandy's son just won the Texas Little League championship, right? So Mandy cares about kids, and her son is out there winning state championships. So that's a big deal. So we'll come back to Mandy later on in our program. But next up, let's go straight to Kim Coffrin. Kim Coffrin is the leader of the early education effort, early childhood education effort at Children at Risk, and is a state leader in regards to early childhood education. And Kim, give us an idea of what you thought.
Good morning, Dr. Bob. Good to be with you, and hello, everybody. So yeah, I mean, it was a tough session. There seemed to be getting tougher nowadays, but we are glad to get a few across the finish line and kind of talk about our next steps. So go ahead and switch to the next slide. We're going to start with the good, and they'll kind of go over missed opportunities, and then we'll talk about next steps. So two bills that I want to raise up. One is House Bill 1615. This is a bill that really solidifies a longstanding child care professional development scholarship program that has been with Texas since 2011, excuse me. And so it really solidifies that into statute and makes that into law. And so that is exciting that scholarship will continue for educators in the future to go for early childhood educators in the future to go back to school and continue their professional training and degree plans. So I'm excited about that. The other piece that this bill did was solidify pre-K partnerships. Many of you remember back in 2019 when House Bill 3 passed, that was a bill that introduced partnerships in a more formal way between child care centers and public school ISDs, and to offer pre-K at those child care centers when ISDs don't have space, can't reach the capacity, it's better for communities, et cetera. And that partner, TWC, Texas Workforce Commission, has started a new pre-K partnership program a little over a year ago. And so this bill also solidifies that program to continue that partnership. We know there's two different worlds with partnerships. It's the child care licensing and Texas Rising Star systems and child care subsidy, and then there's the TEA system with public schools. And so that department helps bridge those gaps and make sure child care centers are armed with the information of how to set those partnerships up that is best for children, best for the provider, best for the school district, best for families. So we're excited to see about that. It also adds a representative from the childcare workforce to sit on each local workforce board. So TWC is currently in the process of developing the definition of what early childhood childcare workforce is. Does that mean someone currently in the field, someone that has X amount of years of experience, et cetera? So we're anxiously waiting to see what that definition is, and we'll be watching the boards as they make sure they implement that person onto their board, giving more representation to that childcare voice in those workforce boards decisions. So super excited about that opportunity as well. The other one that Dr. Bob and Mandy have teased a little bit about, and I'm going to tease about it here, and then I'll talk a little bit more about it in our next steps, is SB 1145, which was championed by Senator West and Representative Tallarico, that makes it permissible for city and county tax authorities to provide property tax relief to childcare providers with 20% of their enrollment that are on childcare scholarship or childcare subsidy through TWC. So super excited about how this potentially can be a gateway for providers to start saving some money that they can then invest those cost savings into reducing costs for families, and or also increasing educator compensation. We know our early child workforce is one of the lowest compensated professions. There, many of them are making $11 an hour or less, and so how can we save providers money that they then can invest in their families and can invest in their educators? So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides, because there's a next step. Anytime there's a property tax change, that means there's a constitutional amendment, which means it's going to go up for a vote. So we'll kind of talk about that in just a second. So more to come on that one. Okay, so now missed opportunities. So go ahead to the next slide, please. As Mandy said, we had lots of champions on both sides of the aisle that were fighting for early childhood and fighting for children and families. But as a collective, we were able to miss a bunch of opportunities that really could have gotten across the finish line. I'm going to kind of go in a clockwise motion as I talk about these, but HB 1969 would have provided some consistent information from local workforce boards, give them be able to increase the number of childcare representatives on the boards, allow more flexibility with performance targets. It was really trying to focus in on those workforce boards. As many of you know, Texas Workforce Commission gets their funding from the federal government through the Child Care Development Block Grant, and then that money gets farmed out to the 28 local workforce boards. And there we see inconsistencies within those workforce boards, how they manage their wait lists, how they market to parents and outreach to parents, how they outreach to providers about Texas Rising Star program and the subsidy program. So all those things are inconsistent within the state, and HB 1979 would have gotten that, would have provided a little bit more consistency across the state. It passed the House with flying colors, did not make it through the Senate, as the majority of a lot of the bills that we ran the session had shared similar fate. But we are excited about some things that TWC is doing that could potentially implement some of the things that this bill would have included. So I'm excited to continue to work with the agency on that one. House Bill 1834 was one that Mandy and I were particularly passionate about, and it did not get across the finish line, unfortunately. But as childcare providers will tell you, and those childcare providers are especially serve low-income families and are in low-income areas, know that they can't charge what it really costs to run a childcare center because their families and their community can't afford it. And so when they choose to participate in Texas Rising Star and get that high quality 4-star, sometimes their reimbursement rate is higher than what they can charge families. And there's a rule that if they aren't charged, that TWC has to reimburse at that lower rate. And so HB 1834 would have fixed that no matter, it would have said, no matter what your quality, no matter what you're charging families, your reimbursement rate would be based on your highest quality. So reimbursing them at the highest rate. It did not make it out of committee. It was very interesting to listen to the debate between members on why it didn't make it out of committee. And one of their biggest concerns was that if we raise reimbursement rates, we're going to serve less kids, and no one wants to kick children out of care. And knowing this fiscal cliff is coming with stabilization grants, we don't want to kick more children out of care. And so there's this debate between members about we need to invest more money, and within themselves. And so it was a good opportunity for them to have that conversation and that realization that, maybe we do need to invest more money. So we'll be talking about that in the interim as well. House Bill 1614 was again about those pre-K partnerships. There's two different eligibilities requirements between pre-K and childcare subsidy. And so this would be create grants to fund that gap. So that way, if you're a child that is enrolled in a childcare center and are on subsidy, but don't qualify for pre-K, this program would have covered that financially. So that way you could participate in that pre-K partnership. Again, that made it through the House, but did not make it through the Senate. And so we're continuing to figure out how do we explore pre-K partnerships? How do we make them better for providers and for school districts and for the children and the families that they're intended to hit? So the last one is this childcare funding. As Dr. Bob said, we had a $33 billion surplus going into session. We all had high hopes that this would be good investments for children and families, and we got a little, but not a lot. And we didn't get any in childcare. So we had the historic big ask of asking for $2.29 billion to provide that bedrock funding and early childhood workforce retention and recruitment incentives. And basically, we were really thinking about this fiscal cliff that is coming when the stabilization grants and the stimulus money runs out from all the COVID dollars, which are going to dry up here in the next few months. How do we keep that? How do we bridge that gap for our childcare providers? We saw a huge dip in deserts when the pandemic hit. The stimulation dollars actually helped bring those numbers back up. But when those dollars run out, we're worried about what kind of cliff we're going to see again. And so, again, this didn't get across the finish line. It did get into Article 11. We did have an author to fight for it, which is the first time we've asked for funding. And so we were proud of our ask. We are proud that we can stand by those numbers. We are continuing to think about how we continue to ask for money and investments in childcare. And the next slide quickly is our next steps. So that's ballot initiative, which I know Dr. Bob's going to talk about. So I'm going to skip to the next two and we'll end with that one. Texas Rising Star Review is coming up. It's every 4 years. It's going to start in August. Stay tuned if you're interested in how Texas Workforce Commission will revise that, what changes they'll make. There's also the prenatal preschool development block grant, the prenatal birth to 5 grant that TWC also has. They've set up a website to keep track of what all that's happening. It's a 3-year grant with $16 million each year. So great work happening there. And then our continued interim work, our early childhood work groups will continue. Texas Tours coming back to your community in person. And then just encouraging not only us, but you to build those relationships with your elected officials during the interim now, when they're home. Hopefully they're home, depending on our special sessions, and then we will continue to work on our next steps for next legislative session. So Dr. Bob, you want to talk about this ballot initiative?
Well, I do. I want to put it in sort of the context of a larger question. One of the things that you and I know is that if we were sitting here 6 years ago, Kim, thinking about where Texas could be as a red state around early education, in many ways, we'd never thought that we could be where we are today, right? I mean, we hoped, but I think we've made a lot of progress. And part of that is because we have a governor who, by and large, supports high quality early education, high quality pre-K. We have a speaker right now who supports early education, and those are very good things. And I think that this ballot initiative is another part of this. And because we're going to have the whole state of Texas voting on early education, and they're voting it on it in the form of property tax relief for private early education. But in a sense, we've put early education on the ballot. It's got to be a great thing for our leaders to be able to see if, as we suspect, the great majority of people are going to say yes to early education.
Yes, so it's super exciting. I think you're exactly right that it is the first time that we can vote yes for childcare. That we can say yes, this is important to not only our economy, but to our families. And so we are super excited about that. And this isn't this. I rose-colored glasses, but I also realize that this is not going to fix childcare. This is not the silver bullet. So this is just the first of many of things to come. And the fact that we get to have a statewide vote on it is even more exciting, because that's going to give us information and knowledge as we continue to build this larger ask, this bigger ask to really fix what we really need to fix.
And it's so important for us is that when we think about early education, this is not Republican or Democrat, because
Nope.
This is kids all across our state. This is economic development. This is our future. And we want to make sure that new leaders in both parties understand the importance of this. And as you've heard me say before, Kim, if there were a silver bullet to eliminating poverty in our state, breaking the cycle of poverty, probably number one silver bullet would be high quality early education. So we need to keep pushing this.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Very good. Kim Coffrin is the head of our early education efforts at Children at Risk and part of the Texas Family Leadership Council. Thank you very much, Kim.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Next up, we want to go to our good buddy, Paige Duggins-Clay. And Paige is with the great organization IDRA out of San Antonio. They do a heck of a job, and as does Paige. And so, Paige, why don't you give us your take on how you think Texas did when it comes to K through 12 work at our state legislature. Take it away, Paige.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Mandy, for the invitation to be amongst this really distinguished group of excellent advocates, and for all the advocates, both on the panel and in the audience, for your great work, the staff. I know this was a tough session when it comes to focusing on our youth, our schools, and our families. And unfortunately, we certainly will point out some positive developments, but missed opportunities is not even sufficient. This is really a failure, again, on both sides issue to do what our state and our students and our families need, which is fund our public education system, support our teachers through salary raises and support staff, and to invest in the policies and practices that really make for excellent education for all students. So we saw a lot of distractions this session, and unfortunately, a lot of missed opportunities on the table. You can go ahead. I'll skip this. I just want to flag myself and my colleague, Dr. Clay Latham-Sykes, our Deputy Director of Policy, my wonderful colleague. Please reach out to either of us if you want to follow up on any of the information that I'm about to share. You can go 2 slides ahead. IDRA really focuses on 5 core policy areas, so we'll touch briefly on each of them. And the first is an issue that we were founded on 50 years ago, right? And that's the concept of fair school funding. This is critically important for students and families across our great state. I don't think it'll shock anyone on this call that Texas is woefully behind in terms of national averages of funding our schools and our students and our educators. There's $48.6 billion put into the budget for the Foundation Schools program. That's the baseline amount of funding that flows through the system to all of our state schools. And that was actually a decrease from the last budget cycle. So you heard mention of that historic budget surplus. And the phrase, put your money where your mouth is, really comes to mind. There was a tremendous opportunity. You can go to the next slide, to invest some of that budget. There were tons of riders that could have been adopted. There was a really wonderful piece of legislation, House Bill 100, which would have raised that basic allotment and infused even more money from the state into our Foundation School program and the baseline amount allocated to schools. But that bill and others like it that also would have done historic investments in schools and educators fell hostage to a lot of the culture war issues that the vast majority of students, families, and community members are not interested in and do not feel should be a priority, including some of the issues related to Bob's framing at the very beginning, right around LGBTQ+ equality and opportunity, again, the sort of mythic issue of diversity, equity, inclusion, and really mean-spirited attacks on those policies, practices, and people who do that work. So a very unfortunate missed opportunity. No funding increases, no student funding increases, nothing to address inflation, which when we talk to our school district partners, it's not just that we are facing a historic teacher workforce shortage, and that the needs of our students are greater than ever. The cost of running a school is greater now almost than any other time before because of inflation, and no adjustments to address that very common sense need. You know, one positive is that because of a bipartisan, robust, very diverse coalition, and indeed majority of stakeholders across our state, there was not a policy that would have diverted money out of our already underfunded public school system through vouchers, education savings account, or any other privatization mechanism. We do know that this has become a priority for the leadership in our state. We think this is misguided, and this session, as of so many others, that proposal was defeated. We anticipate that there will be a special session focused on this issue, and look forward to working with so many groups here to continue our earnest, belief and assumption that we have to fund high quality public school education and oppose efforts to divert funding of it for special interests. If you go to the next slide. Again, sort of missed opportunities. There was a very excellent report that talked about how we're going to support our emergent bilingual or English language learner students, and very few proposals adopted from those recommendations this session. I will note that there was a bill that passed that did increase programs to support professional development and pipeline programs for ESL Spanish language teachers. So this is important, but not sufficient, particularly given the demographics of our state and the needs for emergent bilingual students. You can go to the next slide. And of course, again, this is at the heart of the culture wars dynamic. And again, sucking up a lot of oxygen were really misguided attacks on books, instructional materials, and sort of a corollary rise in religious influence in schools. Of course, at IDRA, like so many of you all, we affirm and believe that all students' identities, whether it's their racial, ethnic, or religious identity, or any other aspect of their authentic selves, should be represented and respected and honored in our schools, and that no one identity, religious or otherwise, should be upheld or elevated over another. And so we really saw some dangerous proposals, including one that passed, SB 763, which does allow religious chaplains, religiously affiliated chaplains, to serve in the role as school counselors. I don't know if y'all remember your school counselor, but they perform many functions in addition to having really specific training around mental health and student support, in addition to the unique role of school-based counselors, right? This includes counseling students from an academic lens, from a higher education access lens, connecting students to resources in the community to address all the needs that they bring to school. These are not competencies that are core to religious chaplains. And while I'm sure there are excellent folks out there who want to engage in this work for the right reason, this is a misguided policy when really we could be investing in mental health in schools by creating pipelines for qualified counseling professionals. On the other side, we saw yet another effort to double down on book banning. Texas leads the nation on books that are banned throughout the state. This is a very expensive bill. We don't have time to go into detail, but the infrastructure for the state to administer it and put these labels on books about whether they are sexually explicit or otherwise inappropriate, really creating a robust program that is, again, not funded. So misguided policy priority that is, again, diverting funds away from the core things that we really need our schools to be focused on. You can go to the next slide. This is a space where I spent a lot of time personally working this session. I know it was on the hearts and minds of so many of us as parents. I'm the parent of 4 kiddos in our schools. And so discipline and safety were forefront for me and for so many others. There were some good things that happened. The Crown Act, House Bill 567, was passed. This is a national model policy that has been adopted in many states that protects students, again, affirming all students, regardless of their background and because of their background, right, to wear their hair or other accessories consistent with their cultural identity, their race, their ethnicity, or their faith. So very important codification of protections in that regard for our students who are being, you all may have seen the news stories, disciplined and required to cut their dreadlocks, for example, to participate in athletic activities. Unacceptable. Very glad to see that legislation finally passed and signed by the governor. And another really important, again, bipartisan, powerful piece of legislation, SB 133, the No Kids in Cuffs Act, really led by Senator West, carried by Representative Hull in the House, a second time to get this legislation passed, which prohibits the physical and mechanical chemical restraint of young students in all but the most serious circumstances. And so this is an important victory protecting our young people in this regard, and defeated some very harmful exclusionary discipline practices. We can go forward, and I'll pause here because I know we need to get to some Q&A, because I do think this is important. Again, those missed opportunities, we could have made historic investments in mental health, including school-based mental health professionals and practices. And the major vehicle for school safety this session, a bill called House Bill 3, was passed. And unfortunately, while there is some positive guidance and some investment in resources, that bill does increase the school safety allotment, adding a $15,000 per campus allotment. That's significant, but really nominally raising the per student allotment from, I think, $9.70 to $10 per student. So this bill has many hardening mandates, including an armed police officer requirement, in addition to being inconsistent with data and research around what makes really safe schools. Very expensive, and certainly not enough money for schools to cover the enormous cost of these hardening practices.
Paige, thank you so much for your work. I wanted to ask you a question. It does seem like maybe the biggest missed opportunity was K through 12, right? I mean, this has such a big impact on our kids. And post-pandemic, post-Uvalde, it just seems like our legislature was, not moving at all on some of the right things. I wonder your take on, we have Republicans and rural legislators and people that are pro-charter that are all against vouchers. And when you see these numbers of people that are against vouchers, why do you think this movement keeps happening in our state? And is there a way for us to stop it?
I mean, I think the good news and the important point is that we have stopped it time and time again. Special interest groups, very rarely, right, are these special interest groups connected to our communities, to our schools. We see this both in the voucher fight. We see this in some of the other politicized book bans. And so being honest and holding our leaders accountable for who they are accountable to, right? Our students, our families, our educators. So I do think that that strong coalition recognizes the educational, the economic, and the moral, right, benefits of strong public schools. And I'm so grateful that people continue to come together to defend and protect it. And IDRA looks forward to continuing that work going forward.
It's almost like it's a knee-jerk ideological. It's like they don't want to see any evidence because there's no evidence to support going forward on vouchers. It's certainly in the state of Texas. So, Paige,
cannot emphasize that enough, and thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. Paige Duggins-Clay, she is with IDRA, and thank you, Paige, for all your great work and for that of your whole team over there at IDRA. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. Next up, we want to go to look at equity and children and families in our state. We have with us Sharon Watkins-Jones, my good buddy, who's the Chief Equity Officer at Children at Risk, and she's the Director of the Texas Racial Equity Collaborative. Sharon, give us the good, bad, and the ugly.
And there definitely was some of that. I think I'd like to highlight a little bit further the Crown Act as one of the highlights of this session. Of course, we know it was House Bill 567, sponsored by Bowers and Rose et al., which prohibits race-based discrimination. Crown stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. And as we heard a little bit earlier, it was passed to create a process to combat and reduce hair discrimination in the workplace and academic settings throughout the state of Texas. We're really pleased to see this pass with bipartisan support and very little opposition in a legislative session where diversity, equity, and inclusion seem to be challenged at all fronts. In the area of inclusion in educational settings, there were a couple of other significant wins. HB 1212, which prohibits a school district from requiring a note from a clergy member or other religious leader to excuse a student absence related to the observance of a religious holy day. So the school district is required to accept a note from the student's parent or person standing in parental relation to that student. Additionally, HB 1883 requires that a board of trustees or a governing body must provide alternative assessment dates for students who observe religious holy days or have a period of religious observance. And the Texas Education Agency can adopt rules as necessary to ensure these provisions. The bill defines religious holy day or a period of religious observance as a holy day by religion whose places of worship were exempt from property taxation. And for students, this is going to include days such as All Saints Day, of course, Christmas, Diwali, Good Friday, Yom Kippur, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and others. So a school district's board of trustees or an open enrollment charter school, their governing body can make consideration for those days and periods of religious observance likely to be observed by students for the administration of assessments and testing for that school year with certain restrictions. Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges and missed opportunities this session. One thing that we will be looking at in the future is the implementation of Senate Bill 17 that was passed and signed by the governor. And of course, that's a major blow to DE&I efforts with the state. The bill prevents public colleges and universities in Texas from having DE&I offices or policies. And the bill prohibits hiring or employment practices that take into account race, sex, color, ethnicity, other than the use of colorblind, sex-neutral hiring practices. And under Senate Bill 17, university employees in charge of hiring new faculty or staff are not able to ask a job candidate about their understanding of DEI and how they would create a campus where everyone feels welcomed. And so that's a big blow to young people in particular, our young folks that are opportunity youth that are seeking higher education. Universities will not be able to implement any DE&I initiatives. The missed opportunities that are on our agenda, of course, have to do with racial disparities in state government and reestablishing the Office of Minority Health Statistics and Engagement. We know that having an Office of Minority Health Statistics and Engagement would centralize information about health disparities in minority groups and create a hub for existing local and federal offices to facilitate cohesive policies that promote access to healthcare for Texans. And so we were pleased to see Senate Bill 180 introduced by Senator Miles to reestablish this office because Texans need a state office dedicated to collecting and analyzing data on disparities of health outcomes. And the goal there was to fully equip policymakers with centralized information about those disparities while working with existing local and federal agencies to develop strategies to repair the damage exacerbated by the pandemic. And although the bill did not pass the introduction stage, it's important to keep this in mind for future sessions because it's important to ensure that our state is ready to respond to any disparate needs of Texans amidst the aftershocks of COVID-19. Another missed opportunity is the usage of the Sunset Review as a legislative oversight tool to take a look at DE&I and to address disparities. The Sunset Review process has a proven track record of improving state laws that have led to major policy changes in nearly every arena of state government. We were hopeful when Senate Bill 1240 was filed by La Montilla and sponsored by Canales. And if that bill would have passed, it would have required that all Sunset Reviews assess an agency's effort to reduce racial disparities. The requirement utilized an existing process in the Sunset Review to evaluate how different sectors of state government could address racial disparities or have addressed racial disparities in the areas that they work in. By ensuring that state agencies like TEA, Texas Education Agency, and the Texas Health and Human Services Commission are working to address disparities in the outcomes of their work, be they racial, be they geographical, rural, urban, disparities wherever they are could be measured so that state agencies could help to create an equitable playing field for all Texans. So while this measure was not forwarded, we do have some hope that it may be a possible point of discussion during interim studies in the Speaker's House Select Committee on Educational Opportunity and Enrichment, which calls for the consideration of modernizing assessment and accountability measures for Texas students. And so there's where we stand on equity, diversity, and inclusion in the state of Texas for kids and families.
Sharon, whenever I talk about this issue, and I know you do as well, I love to talk about the data on our kids, right? Because I sometimes think that our leaders don't understand the data. And when we look at our children, first off, Texas is the second youngest state in the union, right? In terms of kids. Utah is the youngest state, has the youngest population. Texas is the second youngest. And when we look at our kids, 70% of our children are children of color. A third of our children are children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. I mean, and for every white baby born in Texas, 17 Latino babies are born. And I wonder if our legislature doesn't get all of this stuff. I mean, because otherwise they'd be much more interested in some of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we bring to anyone listening today or watching today that the Texas Equity Report is on our Children at Risk website, which highlights some of the disparities that are faced by kids in Texas and the demographics of Texas children now. This is not a moral imperative anymore. I mean, it is a moral imperative, but for some, they need to know this is an economic imperative for the reasons that you just mentioned. You know, we have kids in Texas who are becoming a majority, and if we don't do whatever it takes to help every kid in Texas, we're going to not prosper as a state.
And I often love to point out Fort Bend County, right? Sort of the big bedroom community outside of Houston, which is the county with the least amount of child poverty in our state. But when you look at the demographics, it's about 25% Asian, 25% white, 25% African American, 25% Latino. It seems like when we talk about equity, that's sort of an ideal that Texas, this is a Texas that could be super successful and sort of stand out in the United States. And yet we tend to forget about these things, and we want to talk about the Alamo for some reason. So anyway, Sharon, thank you very much for all the work that you do and for all the allies and collaborators across the state that are working with you. Thanks so much. Sharon Jones from Children at Risk and from Texas Racial Equity. Thank you very much. Up next, we want to talk a little bit with Mandy Kimball. Mandy's coming back, and Mandy is, of course, the Vice President and Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs at Children at Risk. And Mandy spends a lot of time in Austin during the legislative session. And Mandy, you're going to talk a little bit about opportunity youth and safety. How do kids fare when it comes to safety and opportunity youth this session?
There were some positive steps, but much more that needs to be done, particularly around our opportunity youth. So for those who are not familiar with this term, it is the youth between 16 and 24 who are not going to school and are not in college. And oftentimes, as you can imagine, there's several factors that are affecting these children that makes life difficult at times. And so policy-wise, we're really trying to figure out, one, how can we prevent youth from dropping out? And Paige talked about a lot of the issues that can support kids while they're in school. But then when they stray away, how can we re-engage them as well? So if you can go to the next slide, please. But we're going to start off with higher ed. Because a lot of schools students, perhaps they get their GED or perhaps they graduate, but there can oftentimes be several barriers that they face to be able to get into higher ed or to be able to get an apprenticeship. And so a few bills that passed this session that are worth noting is one, allowing students who are parents to have early registration. So if you are 18, 19, 20, and you have a child, there's a lot of things that you're balancing, and it could be childcare, it could be work, and you're trying to go to school, which is often the case. Senate Bill 459 allows them to register early. And this goes in line with student athletes are allowed to register early. Oftentimes honor students are allowed to register early, and that was because they want to make sure that those students can get the classes that fit with their schedules. And so if you are a student parent, you will now have that privilege, which is a win. Also, another bill that was passed requires public higher ed institutions to have a liaison officer for parenting students. And this is important because just like counselors in schools, public schools K through 12, liaison officers can help these students navigate various services. So making sure that they tap into public benefits if they're eligible, particularly health coverage, or if they're needing to navigate transportation needs, and also academic strategy. So having that extra layer of support in higher ed while they're going to school is extremely important, as well as now higher institutions of higher education are going to be required to provide information around mental health and suicide prevention services. I know Claire will be talking about mental health, Dr. Bikini, later on in the event, but mental health is a major need, and to be able to help with those stressors and be able to cope with the situations are really important. And so it's exciting that these students, when they're in college, will be able to get those services. Next slide, please. Workforce development. So Texas prides itself on making sure that students are college, career, or military ready. And we know that not all students have the same privileges or have access to the same programs or support. So this session, there's a lot of conversation around students in rural communities, and also really looking at the school districts and what can they access in regards to programming and teachers. So House Bill 2209 really focuses on the rural students and making sure that they can have cross-sector partnerships. So if you're a rural community, basically an ISD, that you would be able to partner with other ISDs in regards to their college and career pathway partnerships, so that those students have more options in regards to their pathways, and really making sure that the economies of scale are up to par for the needs of all those students in the rural communities. So that's really exciting. The other two bills are really looking at wage outcomes, wage and employment outcomes, really. So in public schools and colleges, people are getting their certifications, or they're going through their apprenticeship programs. Are the careers there for them? Are they able to connect? The certifications that they got, or the apprenticeship program they went through, are the wages able to provide enough to support them moving forward? Texas has 28 local workforce boards, which means that there's 28 different local workforce boards operating different ways, prioritizing various needs. And so to be able to have the data and really to be able to analyze what is working. We're spending millions, if not billions of dollars on workforce training and trying to make sure that students are ready for career, but is it working in the right way? And so these two bills will really help us have a better understanding of what's going on so that students can be prepared. Next slide, please. So there were a couple of missed opportunities around Opportunity Youth that I would like to highlight. One was House Bill 2302. And as I mentioned, there's 28 local workforce boards. Their primary responsibility is the workforce, making sure that there's a strong economy, that people are getting that training. However, with Opportunity Youth, they're falling through the cracks. And so what this bill would have done was require local workforce boards to include Opportunity Youth in their strategic plans. They already have to have a strategic plan. If you don't have a plan, it's hard to address those needs. So making sure that our youth who we want to be college and career ready are a priority and fit in the strategic plan so we can figure out what is working. And then Paige also on her slide, she'd had House Bill 185 by Representative Mary Gonzalez. This is a preventative measure. Texas is one of the few states that doesn't have a definition for chronic absenteeism. And this bill would have created the definition. It also would have included students who are chronically absent to be under the at-risk category to ensure that they get the supports and funding that they need in school to hopefully prevent them from dropping out and failing. And then also for TEA to report this data. This is a wise and an easy step that Texas could take to really help us grasp what is going on with our at-risk students and students who are not showing up to school so that they have a better chance in life. And we really hope that this will be addressed in the upcoming legislative session. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about human trafficking. Texas is a hub for human trafficking. The I-10 corridor is the main route for human trafficking. A lot of folks think that it's an international issue. I know that there is a new movie out talking about human trafficking in other countries and someone being kidnapped. The reality in Texas is that our youth, U.S. citizens, are most at risk. And when you talk to law enforcement, when you talk to the courts, it is American children, oftentimes in foster care, oftentimes those who run away, oftentimes those who are at home, and because of technology and various other efforts, make our children vulnerable. Next slide, please. Texas has done a lot over the past decade around human trafficking and strengthening our anti-human trafficking efforts that we should be really proud of. Excited that this is an issue where both folks from both sides of the aisle come together to address. And so there were some big wins this session. Senate Bill 1527 is the omnibus bill. It was a real holistic approach in addressing human trafficking. One big win is that now child grooming is being looked at in regards to prosecutions and added protections. Traffickers take the time to groom these children to try to lure them into the situations. And so there will be more protections around that. Labor trafficking was also looked at. We've talked a lot about sex trafficking over the years, but particularly when you look at illicit massage businesses and strip clubs, restaurants, we're seeing more labor trafficking going on. Child pornography, which there were a couple of bills that addressed, was a focus this session, and it was very much needed. So because of technology, because of the internet, child pornography is more accessible than it ever has, and our laws have got to keep up with that. And so basically what this legislation did was enhance the sentences when multiple images are possessed and promoted. So rather you could have one, or if you have 500, and oftentimes people have thousands. And so making sure that the punishment is at par. Transportation network companies. It is 2023. I use transportation network companies all the time. I'm sure most of you do as well. And guess what? Traffickers are using them as well. No longer do they need to take children and drive them from point A to point B. They call a transportation network company. Law enforcement came to us and said, can you please help us? This is what we're seeing. There's 11, 12, 13-year-old girls that are being trafficked at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. What can we do to help prevent this? And so House Bill 2313 now requires that transportation network companies provide human trafficking to the drivers, which will help a lot. Next slide, please. I'm almost done, Bob. Survivor services. There were several pieces of legislation that is making it easier for survivors and victims to access services. One is to make sure that if a child has been abducted, that they are able to participate in the address confidentiality program. Something else that's really important is after a child or an adult are rescued, clearly there's been a lot of trauma, and it takes a lot to be able to prosecute the traffickers or the buyers. And sometimes it's too much to get them on the stand to identify that third party to make sure that they get the services that they need. So they eliminated the third party identification requirement. That is going to go a long way in regards to those survivors and getting the services that they need. And then also talked about child labor in regards to allowing investigators to really dig in and be able to prove that it's happening in Texas and something that we need to talk about. Next slide, please. And then this will be my last slide. In regards
I'm good at cutting
to,
everyone off except for you, Mandy. What's the deal with that? You know,
I know,
we're way over
illicit
time.
massage businesses, because these are really important and people need to hear about it. Illicit massage businesses cover the state of Texas. And as long as there's going to be demand, there's going to be supply. And again, our laws have not caught up to really cracking down on illicit massage businesses. And this means that we need to be able to allow tenants to evict, or landlords to evict the tenants when there's an illicit massage business taking place. That passed this session. And then also, if someone has a sexual assault offense, that they are not allowed to obtain a massage license. Some of these things make you scratch your head like, do we need a law? But we do, because law enforcement and investigators are really digging in and seeing what is contributing to this horrific crime.
Mandy, I think we'd be amiss also to not, Caroline Roberts is a key part of our team who worked on a lot of these issues, right? These human trafficking issues. And she stopped right near the end of the session to have a baby. So she's with baby Wade, but she's also part of the team that would be here today if she weren't.
She would be giving this presentation,
Yeah,
and it's her
exactly.
birthday. So
Today's
to
her
her.
birthday. Yeah, very good.
And yep, so big shout
Thanks,
out
Mandy.
to everything she's done. Yep.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Let's move on. We want to talk next about nutrition and health. And two great speakers. Jamie Olson is with us. She's the Director of Policy and Advocacy with Feeding Texas, one of our favorite organizations. And then after Jamie, we're going to have Dr. Bikini, who is Assistant Professor at Baylor College of Medicine. And Jamie, take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, next slide. There were a lot of good wins, actually, this session for people experiencing food insecurity. And one of the biggest that we're the most proud of is passing HB 1287. That is a bill that updates the vehicle asset limit in SNAP. So Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, has limits on the value of a person's vehicle that they can have and still qualify for the program. And these limits were sorely outdated. They had not been updated since 2001 and 1974, respectively. And now they will be updated thanks to HB 1287 by Representative Guillen, and the Senate sponsor was Senator Blanco. The limits are increasing from $15,000 to $22,500 for a family's first vehicle, and then from $4,650 to $8,700 for any subsequent vehicles that family owns. So the bill was signed by the governor on June 12th and takes effect September 1. Next slide. We also passed a bill this session regarding Texans who are exiting the criminal justice system. So this bill is going to implement a SNAP pre-registration system. So all that means is that when someone is incarcerated and then they have their release date assigned, they are going to have the opportunity to apply for SNAP, meaning filling out the lengthy application and going through the application interview process that's required while they're still incarcerated. So then if they are approved for those benefits by the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, they will exit incarceration with that benefits card, with the EBT card in their release packet. So they will literally walk out the door with it and be able to purchase groceries the very next day. This is a huge improvement over the current system, which makes folks wait until after incarceration to apply. And then those folks can be waiting, 30 to 60 days before receiving the benefits which they're eligible for. And we all know that those first few months of reintegration is super critical time for folks. So we're very excited about this one as well. Next slide. And of course, there was a lot of money this legislative session going around. And so there are a lot of things to highlight in terms of funding that was allocated by the legislature. We effectively doubled the surplus agricultural products grant. This is a grant that helps Texas food banks source surplus or unsellable produce. So you can think your ugly fruit, right? This is a produce that's perfectly nutritious and edible to eat, but maybe for whatever reason they can't sell it in grocery stores, and so the food banks purchase that produce up and then distribute it to communities in need. So we're able to increase the legislature's investment in that program. Also, for the first time ever, the legislature decided to invest in nutrition incentive programs, also known as SNAP Double Up Bucks. The $6 million investment will help the program match participants' dollars at participating farmers markets or grocery retailers. And you can check out the Sustainable Food Center's website for a list of all those locations. But it's a really great program that helps incentivize people to make healthy choices when they're at the grocery store, because it matches dollar for dollar the benefit amounts when people purchase healthy fresh fruits and vegetables. The Houston Food Bank also received a $10 million investment for their new multi-agency resource center. This is going to be a brand new building in Chairman Wally's district that is going to be a hub for low-income families. So it's going to have basically a satellite location of the Houston Food Bank, but also a lot of other services, wraparound services for low-income families. So it's essentially a one-stop shop for anyone who is struggling to get connected to the resources that they need. So really innovative concept, and we are excited to see it. And then also, for the first time ever, the legislature invested in the school breakfast program. By eliminating the reduced price lunch categories. So what that means, or excuse me, reduced price breakfast category. So what that means is normally low-income families fall into one of two categories. They either get free breakfast and lunch at school or reduced price breakfast and lunch at school. And this $6.6 million investment will eliminate that reduced price category for breakfast, which means just more families, approximately 70,000 families, will now eat breakfast for free. The original ask was to do this for breakfast and lunch. So just as a note there, it would take a bigger investment to apply this to lunch as well, but this was a huge win for low-income children as well. And next slide. Finally, some missed opportunities. We had a bill that we were championing around the concept of healthy food being good medicine, which we all know is true. This bill would have created a pilot program under Medicaid to reimburse folks for programs like produce prescription, food RX, or medically tailored meals. And unfortunately, it did pass the House, but was not heard in the Senate. So that will be an opportunity for next session. And then we also had a bill addressing college hunger. SNAP is notoriously difficult to access for college students. The vast majority of them do not qualify, and those that do often have other challenges with getting connected to the program. And so this is a big missed opportunity for this session. I will say there was a different bill, HB 4571 by Busey, that passed the House. So it got halfway. It did not get heard in the Senate. But I think there can be some alignment there because HB 1501 was not heard in either side. And so we will be working with Rep. Busey to push that next session. That's all for me.
Thank you so much, Jamie. So appreciate it. And we're going to switch over to Dr. Claire Bikini, who's over at Baylor College of Medicine and a key member of the Texas Family Leadership Council, always giving us updates on health. Dr. Claire, give us an idea of what you think the legislative session did for health and Texas children and families.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. And I will just emphasize that today I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not my employer. So next slide, please. Excellent. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, we had such huge opportunities with the budget surplus to really improve access to care for kids. As you can see here, looking at the blue line, that's Texas uninsured rate for children versus yellow, which is the national rate, and we're almost double. We still rank last in number of kids who are uninsured. If you want to go ahead and click again. And, we did see some improvement in number of kids who are insured, and that all has to do with during the pandemic emergency, kids weren't kicked off of Medicaid. Now, of course, as the pandemic emergency has ended, more and more children are coming off of Medicaid per our usual practice. Next slide, please. So we had, really an amazing opportunity to try to improve, get more kids access to care. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of action on this. There was one bill by DSC, which would have resulted in an estimate of at least 100,000 more children enrolled in Medicaid. And what this would do is streamline Medicaid applications. So if you are a family and you apply for SNAP, I've heard lots of good news about SNAP just now. The Texas state recognizes that you're also eligible for Medicaid. They would ask you if you wanted your child to be enrolled in Medicaid as well. It would have been great from our standpoint, and again, get another 100,000 kids easily enrolled in Medicaid. And this passed the House, but unfortunately never got heard in the Senate. Next slide, please. Another big problem with access to care in Texas is that Medicaid reimbursement rates have been extremely low, and so providers have had a hard time taking large numbers of Medicaid patients on their patient panels because the reimbursement rates in some situations are so low that not consistent with actually being able to have a viable practice. So for the first time in over a decade, we actually did see Medicaid reimbursement rates increase, and that's a big deal. 6% for children 0 to 20, with a real emphasis on well child checks for kids. 6% increase in birth and women's health-related surgeries. Again, this is good news because this means more people are going to, continue to accept Medicaid, and people who have Medicaid insurance will have a provider where to go. There's also another $63 million in additional funding for early childhood intervention services, which provides children who are at risk of developmental needs access to really important therapies: physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy that helps them fulfill their developmental potential. Next slide. That was good news. Maternal mortality, we saw some movement finally. We know Texas it's absolutely tragic that we have such high rates of maternal morbidity and mortality, and we see huge disparities, right? We continue to see Black women having at least twice as high maternal morbidity and mortality compared to other races and ethnicities in our state. And, we've had many experts from across the state, across the nation say one of the best things you can do to address this is have women have access to health insurance, not just for 2 months after they deliver their baby, but for 12 months. And after trying for several sessions, this finally passed. And so we are going to see women, thanks to Representative Rose, have Medicaid coverage for 12 months after a pregnancy. We also saw some important investments. I'm not sure it's enough money, but at least it's something to reverse the trend of these maternity deserts, where we have so many areas in the state of Texas where you don't have access to routine obstetrics care. And so for labor and delivery, Medicaid will pay actually 3 times what they had for rural hospitals. So you'll get $1,500 instead of $500, and also a $50 million grant to try to sustain rural hospitals and invest in maternal health. Next slide, please. So that was all good news. Around mental health, there were so many good bills that could have done so much more, but we know Texas ranks last in access to mental health care services. I struggle. I mean, as a pediatrician, we see this all the time. Kids wait so long for access to mental health care. We did see a lot more money put in some important places, but I think we also missed out on a number of opportunities when it comes to mental health. We have a huge shortage in mental health care providers. And while, there again was some additional money put in for, crisis centers for youth, mobile crisis outreach teams for youth, there was some loan reimbursements or loan repayment programs for mental health providers. And there was specific money put in for continued support for the Uvalde community after this terribly tragic shooting at the school. So again, we had some good investment, but not enough for mental health. Next slide, please. Vaccines, this was a big defense here. I'm an infectious disease specialist. I am passionate about getting kids to stay healthy and preventing vaccine-preventable illness. We were able to block some pretty scary bills. There was one bill that did pass, but it was really watered down. So overall, I think vaccines, we didn't make any huge losses with vaccine policy. I will say one thing that was scary about this session is that anti-vaccine bills really became more mainstream. They got more traction. We saw Senator Kolkhorst's kind of omnibus vaccine bill that had a number of scary things, including not having the Department of State Health Services be the ones to decide which vaccines are required for school, but the state legislator to make that decision. People who I respect greatly, but don't have as much expertise when it comes to public health and vaccine preventable disease. And that, thankfully did not pass. But I think this is going to come up more and more in future sessions, and we have to be prepared to address it. Next slide. We just talked about food insecurity with Jamie, so we can actually skip this slide, but I share her her optimism and really being excited about the fact that we made some gains with that. Really happy about the vehicle asset test being taken away from SNAP eligibility. And then we made some small wins on nicotine, more money for Texas tobacco control. Representative Theory did have a nice bill trying to decrease or prohibiting marketing geared towards kids when it comes to e-cigarettes. Firearms, we had a huge missed opportunity. I don't know how anybody could sit through some of the hearings on requiring a background check and raising the age to buy a semi-automatic rifle to 21 and hearing testimony from the families who've been affected by the Uvalde tragedy and not act. But we saw really no movement on those bills, even though we know firearms are the leading cause of death in children in the United States. And then, going against, every recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics and other similar organizations, we saw a prohibition of gender-affirming care pass. Next slide. So overall, this was a tough session. I love our state and the state of Texas. Those are our kids enjoying Texas, cowboy hats and bluebonnets. But tough session, I'd say. We had some good wins, but we will have a lot of work to do in the interim, getting ready for the next session from the health perspective. Hope that was okay, Bob.
That was good. I want to ask a very quick question because we're out of time, but I always have to ask you a question, Dr. Bikini. One of the things that we know is that when it comes to insured children, insured parents, Houston is the largest city in the developed world, the most uninsured city of the developed world, followed very quickly right by Dallas and San Antonio. We're one of only 10 states that hasn't expanded Medicaid, which is really hasn't accepted federal money for our children and our families. Do you foresee that changing? We've seen a lot of red states say, no, we're going to go ahead and serve our children and families. Is Texas going to change up?
Oh, I wish so. I actually meant to bring that up, Bob. Thank you for bringing that up. We are one of 10 now that North Carolina decided to, put it to a vote and expand Medicaid. Gosh, I hope we can figure out some way to make that happen. It would help us tremendously in a lot of ways. I think we're far away from it, though, if we have our, current state leadership stay in place.
Claire Bikini from Baylor College of Medicine and the medical advisor to the Texas Family Leadership Council. Thank you very much, Claire. Let's go to our panel. We have a great panel to talk about reactions and interim priorities. And so on the panel, Becky Callahan is with us. She's the Director of Philanthropy Advocates. Kelsey Erickson Stroford is with us. She's the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association. I almost single-handedly support your members, Kelsey. And then there's Patrick Brophy, who is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Education Policy Guy for the North North Texas Commission up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Thank you all very much. If we can start, Becky, I'd love to start with you. Very briefly, sort of give us an idea for you, your reaction to this session and for the things that you care most about. What was your reaction to the legislative session? And I'll ask each of you the same thing.
Sure. So my first and shortest reaction is it's not over yet. We're hoping for a special session where the rest of our policy priorities around teacher preparation, compensation, early childhood, school finance related mechanisms can finish out. We all know kind of what happened in the regular session. And so I think we do have an opportunity there to finish. But we did see education to workforce alignment, a strong realization and preference in the state that all legislators understand the value of education, and it's really conversations around the details of what that means, but the value is there when we're tying it to the post-secondary and workforce opportunities for students.
Kelsey, for you, what's your initial reaction to the legislative session?
For us, restaurants had a great session overall. I think where we had missed opportunities, I love that phrase, is around childcare. And as an association, we've really jumped into this space and said our lack of childcare in Texas is becoming a true economic crisis. It's a true worker shortage crisis, not just today, but really looking down the line for the future. And so this session for us was really about kind of planting that flag and saying we need to be more engaged and really lead this conversation. And we're excited to build on that over the interim and over next session.
Yeah. And how about for you, Patrick?
Our session was a mixed bag. We saw a lot of forward progress in healthcare, economic development, and infrastructure. But as far as fostering an environment for new talent, local governments, and education, both wins and losses. We're thankful to, on the whole, say that we had a pretty good session. But one aspect that I think needs to be pointed out of the challenges that we saw was a breakdown of the process. It was just due a lot to a lack of the experience in the Capitol. We saw a high number of freshman members and what some say is a record of new staff and chiefs of staff. The 181 office, it's about roughly 100 had new leadership as far as the office side. And I think those learning curves were apparent throughout the session. Slow down timelines, backlogs with Ledge Council really led to a lot of confusion, lack of transparency, and hurt us in the long run, and is frankly the reason why we see these multiple special sessions and expect to come back in the fall.
Patrick, let me ask both you and Kelsey that this question is, every year when we get ready for the legislative session, it seems like the legislative session is a little wacky, but it seems like it gets wackier almost every year. And maybe it's because we have more and more freshmen and people are coming for political reasons rather than sort of get the job done sort of reasons. But when it comes to the business community, Patrick at the North Texas Commission, Kelsey at the Texas Restaurant Association, we seem to see the business community becoming a great ally for children and families because they're realizing it's economic development. Talk about that as opposed to, Patrick, that business community's impact as opposed to what the legislature is actually doing.
Certainly, at the North Texas Commission, we stress good policy over politics. It's a constant struggle, and it's because Texas is a primary state that these candidates, whether they want to or not, are forced to run on certain agendas, and they've got to make voters happy and meet those campaign promises. We see that come out in legislation that's filed, some more serious than others. I think that as a business organization and who we represent, we try to push that good policy. We try to be that sensible center that brings both parties together and really preaches the need for bipartisan support. If you look at the set of priorities and the legislation that we tracked from the North Texas Commission standpoint, you may be surprised to find there was a good amount of bipartisan bills, but there's room for improvement. And it's really those far outliers that are with the loudest voices, but minority voices that seem to be drumming up attention and distracting us from the core competencies that our government needs to be supporting for its constituents and businesses.
Yeah. Kelsey?
Yeah, I agree with so much of what Patrick said. And, I've been around a long time. Sometimes session feels wackier. I think we had some real bright spots this session. Extending Medicaid for new moms is a great example, real bipartisan effort, real just common sense effort, right? It's like, it's good for people's health. It's good for economics at the end of the day. So I think it's our job as sort of the reasonable middle to really just hold our elected officials accountable and continue to kind of beat that drum of these are the issues we need you to focus on. Don't get distracted with the shiny object over here that the fringe cares about. Really hone in on these core issues. And I think especially this session, when we had such a big budget surplus, there was a lot of excitement that would kind of naturally pull the legislature's attention to kind of these big issues that we need to tackle for our future. In some instances that happened. In some instances, I think we've got, some work to do for sure.
Kelsey, for you and for the Restaurant Association, one of what would be surprising to many, but once you know about it, it's not surprising. But talk a little bit about the Texas Restaurant Association's real leadership around childcare, right? It seems to be something that why is the Restaurant Association so interested in childcare? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Worker shortages were the industry's #1 challenge before the pandemic. They're our #1 challenge yet again. We talk a lot about Texas's growth being both our biggest opportunity and our biggest challenge. And we see that every day in the restaurant industry. I'm sure everyone here watching has gone to a restaurant, seen open tables and said, why can't I sit there? Why is there a wait? Well, there's a wait because there aren't enough people working in that restaurant to serve you in a timely fashion. And so worker shortage, huge problem, no one silver bullet to fix it. One sort of low hanging fruit is, can we get more working parents back into the economy? The pandemic really exacerbated that challenge. People were all of a sudden not just working parents, but they were working parents and teachers and healthcare providers and mental health care providers and whatever else. And so there's huge burnout. There's a lot of people who just looked at the economics and said, it is better for my family financially for one of us to step out of the workforce, assuming it's a 2-parent home, which in many cases it isn't, and they don't have that luxury. And so for us, it just made a ton of sense. Our workforce in particular is very vulnerable to childcare problems. It has a huge impact. Our workforce is 54% female, 60% under the age of 35. So when you think about people who really need childcare, our industry really stands out. I'm sure it's also not a complete coincidence that we happen to be a female-driven organization at this time. We have female leadership. We have a young team. Many of us live in Austin or Dallas, where the cost of living is going up. And so I just think, it's a moral issue. It's a family issue. But if you don't care about those things, you really should care about the fact that it's an economic issue, and it's going to hold us back from really meeting those benchmarks we need to hit.
Yeah. Becky, what Kelsey is getting at, right, is this idea of they've decided to look at the system, right, the whole system and focus on the system. So oftentimes in the state of Texas, philanthropy in general doesn't look at systems change, right? I mean, they're looking at sort of what's happening specifically in direct service. But you guys look at sort of the system overall, and you're sort of different in that way. Talk a little bit about how maybe philanthropy is changing or needs to change in regards to looking at that system.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a great point around systems change and really the long-term outlook it takes to incrementally go at it every biennium, every session, and chip away at systems issues. Change is hard. 1 in 10 students in Texas or in the nation are educated in Texas. So when we make a big change, we're really making a huge impact from a legislative standpoint. And philanthropy advocates members know that. We have over 50 foundations engaged in our collective voice, and they all choose to come to the table to be better informed actors of that systems change, and where their grant-making private philanthropy dollars are innovating, adding immediate emergency funds and that flexibility for our nonprofit partners and schools and education systems. We're focused solely on education, but as we know, philanthropy crosses all sectors. our members are engaging together through philanthropy advocates and then with our partners so that we can take a longer term view. Philanthropy has that luxury. They're not asking for money. They have the money to sustain as an organization. So we're asking, what kind of information does the field need? What kind of strategies and advocacy support does the field need so that philanthropy advocates can help support that philanthropic sector voice in the system change space. So we're actually doing strategic planning now to really be able to look at what is the systems change opportunity, sort of cradle to career in Texas, that we can take to the Texas legislature with our partners.
In the K-12 system, Becky, about 65% of our kids are coming from low-income families. And so anyone who knows the basics of research and education knows that that's going to be the biggest obstacle, right? When you're coming from a low-income family, K-12 is going to have to deal with that. When you think about the next legislative session and interim possibilities, and on your dream list, what are the things that we could do in K-12 to really make sure that that 65% of our kids have the opportunity to be successful? What comes up for you, Becky, and for your members?
So very much so looking at sort of the pieces of what makes a holistic education experience for students, starting with early childhood education. That's a huge focus of our members, and we've really started to examine and span our voice and perspective in the childcare space, pre-K partnerships. What's the innovation in early learning that also touches those systems? I mentioned it at the outset, teacher preparation and compensation, and how are we ensuring that the teaching workforce is the highest quality and the most supported profession in the state, because they are educating our students and our future leaders and citizens in Texas. And all of this really leads to an outlook of what is the output and outcome of a student going through an education system, and for that future workforce and their own economic mobility. And so something I want to encourage and think through with partners is, how do we stop looking at policy in silos of our issue areas and our focus spaces? Philanthropy advocates, our members, are funding and engaging in policy across the gamut of education. And I want higher education to be supporting early childhood education and vice versa, and all that sort of intersectionality. So that's actually on my wish list for the interim, and our advocacy strategies and what we're thinking about and how we're preparing for the 2025 session. How can we all better interact to be a really big coalition to the legislature on behalf of Texas students?
Becky, you should be working at Children at Risk, right? That whole child, that's sort of the big deal for us. It's really interesting, though, when you talk about teacher preparation, we don't pay enough attention in Texas. And more importantly, the quality of early education has a direct impact on the quality of K through 12, right? I mean, those kids are going to be much more successful if they have quality early education. Patrick, to you, I mean, you are the education policy guy for the North Texas Commission. For you, what is your hope in terms of education policy on the interim? What's on your wish list?
It's certainly more funding. Public education really went unaddressed this last session due to some extenuating circumstances. We weren't able to reach agreements that brought a raise to the basic allotment, much needed teacher pay, and the ability to keep high quality, skilled professionals in the classroom teaching our future workforce. I think starting with funding is where we'd begin in the 89th. Also, making sure that we can tie what schools are teaching, the product that they're producing with our human capital of those future workers being tied directly back to businesses' needs. So accountability and assessment is going to be a huge focus as well. I think Kelsey did a great job of outlining the current standing of the difficulty it is for all employers to find qualified work. We're in a bit of triage in that standpoint. I think the workers are out there. It's just a matter of finding the right amount of pay or work-life balance that meets their needs. But if we fail to address the issues of our public education system now, a generation later, we're not going to have a talent pool to pull from. We're not going to have any qualified workers because we failed to prepare them, and we will pay the consequences for that down the road.
I think that's an excellent point. Kelsey, following up on that, Calvin Coolidge was the president who said the business of America is business, but we could easily say the business of Texas is business. Yet Yeah, we don't see business maybe acting out enough in terms of influencing our state legislature. And we certainly don't see our state legislature reacting to what really works for business and our economy, certainly in the long term. Talk a little bit about, what is the Texas Restaurant Association's message to other business and other business associations in terms of getting engaged, especially when it comes to children and family issues?
Yeah, all I can picture is that Uncle Sam, we want you poster. We're really going to be working over the interim to create some kind of task force, some kind of more formalized group of business leaders on this issue of early childhood education, childcare specifically. And this session, it felt like we came in a little late. We had this huge dollar ask. I don't think the legislature was convinced that we were going to fix problems with that huge dollar amount. It was sort of like, we need this just to kind of, keep the Band-Aids on and keep the boat from sinking. It's a lot of analogies, but so it's really our mission over the interim to kind of get together now and look at where are the opportunities, where can business really come together and be a voice. My perfect world, most restaurants are actually small businesses. So we are really challenged when it comes to childcare, right? Google, Facebook, they can just create their own childcare daycare program in-house for their employees. My members can't do that. They maybe have 25 part-time employees. So what are the small business solutions? Where can we bring together nonprofit and government, private sector money, employee money? How can we kind of pool those resources and create a model that works and bring that to the legislature and really hopefully have a bipartisan sort of solution behind it. So that's our goal, and really is to bring in more of those business voices to the table.
It's almost like many businesses don't understand the power that they have and the power that they could have at the state legislative process. I remember many years ago, Mandy and I, with a group of staff members waiting to see a senator, and they're like, oh, the senator, she's not available right now. But then right after us, the Greater Houston Partnership walked in, right? The equivalent of the North Texas Commission almost. And the senator came, oh, come on in, well, business was, of course, those days, Mandy is much more powerful now, but I think that the days of business being powerful are still here, right? I mean, business has a lot to be able to say and a lot of influence to be able to push legislatively.
We do,
Becky,
but Bob, let me add to that. We need to
Sure.
band together more, and we need to look at those big picture issues more. Sometimes we all get in our little industry silos and we have our own things we're working on. We're guilty of that. We always have a million bills. We're working on that. But we really need to come together as a business community and look at those big picture items where we can have a bigger impact long term.
Yeah, and I think that's very good, right? Because many businesses, and I even see nonprofits do this, they go to the legislature all about how can I get some money, or how do I my business, my organization personally benefit, without seeing some of those big picture issues, right? And I love that idea. Band together and look at the system, look at the big picture. Becky, in our last 10 minutes, I want to ask, biggest missed opportunity or biggest opportunity coming up. I mean, if you were going to be very specific about some of those, what would you sort of point out in 1 and 2 of each of those?
The biggest missed opportunity is that resourcing of the education systems. I think the positioning and sort of where we landed has actually presented a bigger opportunity. If we do go to a special session, we'll have a much more focused conversation about what does it mean to resource education? What are the choices? What's the options? How are we paying teachers? How are we funding early childhood education? All those kinds of details that really does come down to money and resources and the choices you make on how you direct them. That's on the table. And for better or worse, it's on the table in a much more highly magnified way in a special session setting. The media focus is solely on that topic. And so what I hope is that we don't squander an opportunity as advocates for education to really get as much out of this as we possibly could and not have to wait until 2025. I think we have an opportunity to miss an opportunity if we don't get our ducks in a row. And as Kelsey said, really band together and leverage this opportunity for the best we can get for students and teachers.
Yeah. How about for you, Patrick?
I think funding, while it's not the only issue, is core to every problem that we're facing. It's what we need to address. And Dr. Bob, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about our poor children in this state. Through no fault of their own, they are suffering. And our founders were wise enough to guarantee every Texan a free public education, making sure that that was well established, not only for the opportunity of each individual, but for the success of our state. And when we look into this fall at an expected special session and likely to return in the 89th and after is the fight over a private school voucher program. We need to make sure that we are shoring up our public education system, that we're not diverting funds to bifurcate, create a separate system for a separate class that truly is not going to bring the best benefit to the most amount of people. I think that supporting public schools is the right thing to do. It's a smart business decision, and it is what's best for Texas in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the voucher issue, Patrick, because a lot of oxygen has been taken out of the air on an issue that all of us who see the evidence know it's a good, if you have kids in private school, it's great that you're going to get a subsidy. But for the majority of our kids, they don't have their kids in private school, nor is St. John's looking for more members to join their private school, right? Or some of the other high performing privates around the state. So I think that's an excellent point. Patrick, that I did want to ask you also, this is another sort of delicate issue, but we have a state with so many immigrant kids. And when I talk to business owners and to the titans of business in our state, they're all Republican, yet they're all pro-immigration because they understand the importance of immigration. When are we as a state going to get over that, Patrick? This whole idea that we're anti-immigrant when indeed the growth is dependent upon immigration in many ways.
That's tough. That, going back to when we were a republic, I think this is an issue that we fought with, and we may never shed that identity. But I think if you find that balance of strength with compassion, knowing that we need to secure our southern border for practical reasons, but being open and inviting, welcoming to those immigrants who want to come, pursue the American dream, and supply our workforce that we so desperately need. That is where productive conversation happens, finding that line in the middle. It's going to be a delicate balance, but I'm confident that we can get there. I think we see leaders on both sides of the issue working towards that. And frankly, for the fact that doing the same thing over and over again has not produced a different result. I think that our immigrant population is key to Texas. We want to make sure that we continue to invite them in and that we do it the right way and that we give them a path that allows it to be easy. We talk a lot about choice. And right now, a lot of those families don't have very good choices. We talk about choice with the public education system as well. We're supporters of choice. We want to make sure that every family in Texas, whether they're entering or they were born and raised here, has the best choice to get here, to stay here. And we want to make sure that our public schools are the best choice for you to educate here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. Kelsey, I do want to come back to the immigration issue, but I want to do the original, in terms of the biggest miss for you or biggest opportunity in the future. What are you looking at?
Childcare funding, early childhood funding, and K through 12. There were some exciting advances on community college funding. I'll point that out. That's a huge priority for us. We actually have a high school program called Texas Pro Start that's culinary arts, hospitality management in over 200, I think it's over 220 Texas high schools. So we're very invested in the CTE space. But as we've talked about before, it's a continuum. If you have kids that are coming into kindergarten behind, it takes a lot more time, effort, and money to bring those kids up to where they need to be, to where they then have a chance at a rewarding career, be that in our industry or any other. So I think funding is key. I think that we have to be honest with ourselves. I talk a lot to the press about why do things cost more in restaurants? Well, because everything costs more right now. And the same is true for our education system. Everything costs more. So we need to figure out what really sustainable growth and funding looks like. And we need to commit ourselves to do that. And frankly, we're blessed to be in Texas because we do have money. I talked to my colleagues in other states who were making huge budget cuts coming out of COVID. We're not in that position. So we need to kind of double down and invest in our future.
Yeah. People do tend to think of us when we, why are costs going up? We just look at ourselves, right? Costs are going up all over the world. Immigration is happening all over the world, right? It's an issue everywhere. Talk a little bit about the Texas Restaurant Association and how you guys sort of see the future immigration and how, because it is an issue that some people just don't want to talk about, and there are strong feelings, right? But it does seem like industry leaders sort of are sheepishly saying we really want immigration to happen, but we just don't want to. We don't want to be castigated by this whole group of people that hate the whole idea of immigration.
Yeah, I'll say we're not timid. We actually have an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News that ran this week calling for immigration reform. So we're very vocal. And I think one of the things that's great about restaurants is, one, we're bipartisan. Everyone loves restaurants. Everyone has a favorite restaurant, no matter what your political beliefs. But two, we talk about immigration, we talk about America as being a melting pot, right? It's a very food-centric sort of analogy, and that's not the only one. And that's one of our strengths as an industry is our immigration, our diversity. I like to talk about the fact that immigrants are not only a huge part of our workforce, they're a huge part of our job creators. I mean, think about the number of immigrant families that come to America, and the first thing they do is start a local restaurant, bringing their flavors from where they, immigrated from to America, and what a benefit that is economically, socially, in terms of community dynamics. So we are very bullish in calling for immigration reform, calling for DACA protections. We work closely with a group called Forward.us. They project that if DACA ended, we would lose 1,000 workers every workday for the next 2 years. When we're talking about our worker shortages, to think about taking a huge step backwards is terrifying. We also call for temporary visas. There's tons of things we can do. I will say I am cautiously optimistic. I feel like we're getting better rhetoric out of DC, not from everyone, certainly. But, earlier this week, we had a new visa bill introduced by Representative Tony Gonzalez with bipartisan support. We got Congressman Cuellar to introduce a visa bill, again, with bipartisan support. Senator Cornyn's called for protection for DACA and Dreamer kids. So, I think people are starting to kind of feel fed up, and we might not be able to fix all of our immigration border security issues in one fell swoop. But we've let perfect get in the way of the good for decades, and our economy just can't sustain that for much longer.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. All right, one last thing for all of you. I'll start with you, Becky. We want to give a letter grade from children and families to our state legislature for this last legislative session. Even though it's not over, I'm not going to let you say incomplete, but for work up to date, what are you giving them, Becky?
Looking at our policy priorities, higher education was, an A as far as what we specifically asked for. Kelsey mentioned HBA, and in that there's so much good things for students and families and the workforce economy. It is incomplete. So let's kind of average that out to maybe like a C+B, and let's get some extra credit points in a special session.
Wow, C+B, Becky. Great inflation is alive with you, Becky. I'm just hearing it. So how about you, Patrick? What grade are you giving?
I'm more carrot than stick as well. We like to really push and draw attention to the policies over the legislators voting on them. I think when you take all things into account, we saw, like I said, great strides for Medicaid expansion for new mothers. We saw fantastic funding for higher education, particularly our two-year institutions, infrastructure investment, you name it. I know we've talked a lot about what we lacked this session, but I would still, I'd say a B, a hopeful B with room for improvement. I was a B student through school. It served me well. So hopefully that allows the legislators to strive for an A next time.
Texas does love a carrot a lot more than the stick. There's no doubt. We're all optimists here, or else we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Kelsey, what's your big letter grade?
Restaurants had an A. We had a really great session. I think in terms of children and families, I'd go with my colleagues and say room for improvement for sure. Maybe a B minus.
B minus. Okay, very good.
You catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
You do. You do. I always tell, I was on a radio interview yesterday with some of our team, and they're all being super nice. And I said, as advocates, we're so used to being nice in Texas, but the reality is it's not always a nice business, is it? So it's interesting. Kelsey Struford, Erickson Struford from the Texas Restaurant Association, Becky Callahan, Philanthropy Advocates, Patrick Brophy from the North Texas Commission. Thank you guys very, very much. And I know we'll be seeing you in the near future in Austin. Take care, guys. All right, next up, we have our good buddy, Jason Sabo. And Sabo, Under the Dome, you're going to give us a little idea of what to expect during the interim and next steps?
Well, you're not going to ask me for my grade? I mean, come on,
Okay,
Bob.
I will. Well, see, I always save the grades for last, but I'll start.
Okay. No.
I'm going to start. What's your grade, Jason?
An F. I'm just going to say it straight up. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer. I'm going to lead with hope, but I got to be honest. And if you'd have asked me a year ago if the Texas legislature would end its regular session with all of the challenges that our state experiences right now, without investing significantly in K-12 education and early childhood education, without using this historic budget surplus, absolutely, we have failed. And I don't point my finger at the legislature. I look in the mirror, as we all should, and look in the mirror and ask ourselves, how could we possibly have let that happen? This historic opportunity that didn't slip through our fingers because it was never in our grasp, because it was never really ultimately part of the conversation in a real meaningful way.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason, for that. You missed my opening remarks where I gave us a D minus.
I heard your opening remarks. And the word that you used, if I even wrote it down, was you said that there was a meanness to this session.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that that's real. And I think that we need to be cognizant of that meanness. I also heard both Kelsey and Paige use the word distraction, which is another word that I think kind of defined this session. And I heard, I think it was Patrick talk about a broken process. And I think for me, when I look back on this session, it's the process parts of it that really will haunt me, because while we were going through the motion of a regular legislative session, nothing was regular about this session, and much more. I've been doing this since 1999, and I've seen a lot of these things. And Bob and I have had these kind of post-session conversations multiple times. And I'm the guy who has the truckloads of lipstick to put on the pig. I mean, that's my gig. And man, I need a can of spray paint after this session for the pig's lipstick, because the reality is there's a lot to be concerned about that didn't happen, and a lot of lessons to be learned for going forward.
Well, I'm going to let you take the next couple of minutes and give us more of your reaction. Take it away, Jason.
Well, here's what I'm thinking we need to be thinking about going into this next session, as well as the next legislative session, the next special session. The legislature is coming back in September or October, probably both, for a legislative session, a special session that will be focused on public education, public schools. Unlike the regular session, they're not able to dangle the carrot of a teacher pay raise or significant new investments across the board. A lot of that money just got spent in property tax cuts. A lot of that money got spent in things like inflatable balls covered in concertina wire that are now floating in the Rio Grande River, if you haven't been paying attention to the news the last couple of days. Your tax dollars are paying for that stuff. When we talk about missed opportunities, it's not like those dollars kind of evaporated into the ether. They were spent on stuff, right? Not the stuff that you and I might have hoped that they would be spent on going into this next legislative session. So when the legislature comes back for this special session, I'm optimistic that we will be able as advocates to have our voices heard. But the question for me remains, within a broken process, within a process that's gotten significantly meaner, and within a process where there's distraction after distraction after distraction, how will we as advocates within this special session and going forward from that be heard around things like public school vouchers and these other kinds of issues that are of great concern to many people on this call. And the reality is what we're beginning to see based upon the hearings of the last couple of weeks is that things are beginning to get a little clearer as to what's going to happen when the legislature does come back for a public education special session. And it's beginning to look like there aren't going to be a lot of bills that emerge from that session, maybe one or two big bills. And it will become a conversation of, this is the bill that's going to pass. It's got vouchers in it. This is the stuff that everybody else wants to pass. And if you want to get that stuff passed, are you willing to jump on the voucher train? And it's going to be one of those kind of moments where people are going to have a hard conversation with themselves, with their organizations, with their boards of directors about where you want to fall on that line. And I do think that there is an opportunity to get stuff done during the voucher focused special session. But in doing so, what's the negotiation? What's the horse trading, I think, to use Mandy's words, that's going to happen? And those are really intense internal conversations that a lot of people are going to have. One of my most important memories of this session was, and I'm sorry about the lighting, I'm visiting my parents right now in Indiana, and apparently Indiana has bad lighting. But one of the things that struck me about the conversation is about this last session, one of the things that really will resonate with me going forward is I was, as I'm wont to do, sitting in the gallery of the House, ranting and raving about things and about how advocates need to really structure our work differently and be much more community-led versus led by, a bunch of old white people who've been sitting in the Capitol gallery of the House and the Senate for 20 years, present company included. And one of the comments that I made is if the advocacy community doesn't do a better job of partnering with actually impacted people about the policies and proposals that we're making, will continue to become more and more marginalized within the conversation. And I think that going forward, one of the things that we all need to remember is that people matter in this conversation, in this policy-making realm, much more so than maybe they ever have before. What strikes me about where we are politically right now is that the importance of things like data and a good research brief is going down. The importance of things like a well-mobilized, vocal community is going up. The legislature, it comes in waves, right? What motivates the legislature to act? What's motivating the legislature to act right now is the mobilization of real people. And in many ways, as advocates, that's not what we're good at, right? And we had a conversation in Houston last week, and it was fascinating. And if you want to get involved in this, reach out to me and we'll get you involved. But Children at Risk was there. Immunization Partnership helped convene it. Greater, Mental Health America, Greater Houston was there. We saw a lot of organizations coming together, sitting around the table, and we brought in Dallas area Interfaith to talk about what community organizing is, how community organizers and advocates can do a better job of working together in the months and years to come. And I think that in many ways, one of the most important things that was said at that meeting was by the community organizer folks who showed up. And they said, often when we talk to advocates, the position that you bring is, you bring the smarts as the advocates, the organizers will bring the people. And in many ways, there's this kind of historic feeling that the organizers don't necessarily have the capacity to do the research, don't necessarily have the capacity to gather the data, and are beholden to the advocates to do that. That's not the truth. And I think that what needs to happen over the course of the next few years is a different kind of a bottom-up conversation where we're beginning to develop legislative agendas that are aggressive, that are meaningful, that are grounded in reality, but are also important to real people on the ground. And I would challenge all of us as we're thinking about the special session, as we're thinking about developing our agendas for 2025, as we're thinking about working the interim process, I ask all of us to think about what we can be doing to better engage community, to make sure that the ideas that we're proposing, the policies that we're proposing, need to make sure that we need to make sure that they're grounded in what people in the real world want and need. And I, challenge to everyone watching today, reach out across to maybe groups and organizations that don't look like you, that don't talk like you, that don't sound like you, God forbid, that don't think like you, and figure out how we can build a bigger tent and a bigger umbrella. Because if nothing else we learn this session, it's that the most challenging days are in front of us. While we did achieve some big wins that will allow us to organize going into the special session, into the ballot initiative around childcare that Mandy and Bob and Kim all talked about, we got our work cut out for us. And whether or not we're ultimately going to be successful in 2025 depends on how successful we are now in building a different kind of a conversation with a whole lot more people taking part.
Wow, Jason, thank you so very much. The fight never ends though, right? It just, we just have to keep going, whether it's from Indiana with bad lighting or not. So thank you very much, Jason, for your remarks. I want to thank so many of our sponsors today. I think we have a look at the Feeding Texas, the North Texas Commission, the Early Learning Alliance, IDRA, the Children's Defense Fund of Texas, Santa Maria Hostel, the Texas Restaurant Association, Texas Family Leadership Council, Children at Risk, so many people across the state. And this is just a small list of all those groups that are working really hard on behalf of children and families in our state. There's a lot to be done. A lot continues to be done. Texas has so much promise, right? We look at Texas and we see all the potential for our children, for our families. There's just so much to be done. So I hope you guys will join us. I want to thank Jacob and Becky and Lindsay and all those people that work hard to do these summits for us and for today's summit. Thank you guys all for being here, and we'll see you next time as we continue the fight. Thank you for children.
Hi, Melissa. Did you have a question? You can write it in chat as well, if it won't let you talk on your mic.